So in this video we're going to have a look at how to do a little landscape, and we're doing it with acrylic on paper. And we've got a couple of brushes and we're going to get stuck in. So the first thing that I'm going to do is maybe decide where the skyline's going to go. So to do that, I'm just taking my brush, and I'm taking quite a nice brush, and I'm just going to take some ultramarine, and we're just going to paint in some hills that will be running in the background, and we're kind of just setting the horizon line. And you can see that I'm not too worried about what I'm doing. I'm just doing it nice and rough and creating some kind of interesting shapes, but they'll probably change as we're cracking. So we're going to do that, and then maybe what we'll do is we'll add a little bit of crimson to that, and you'll see I'm just taking it here, just working straight out of the tube. Why not? There's no hard or fast rules. You can decide if you want to mix it up on your pad first, if you have a specific kind of color scheme in mind, and then with that, like that. Now I'm just going to add a little bit of white. And so as I said, we're using acrylic, and you'll see now I think we're going to have the light coming from the left hand side, and because this is quite far in the distance, we're going to try and work on some relatively flat colors, not too much detail, because as you know, the further away you get, the flatter the landscape looks and the less detail you can see. So still a little bit too red, and then we'll just push that back again with a bit of the ultramarine, and just to make that more of a kind of bluish purple kind of look. So you'll see that as we add the color now, the different layers of color, slowly that starts to knock back, and then it gets further and further away. And now when I add a bit of white, you'll see that that is really pushing back quite far. So we're just going to do some of that, a little bit of that, and you'll see I'm just using the side of the brush to get nice flat strokes. So there we have a kind of a background thing happening, and then on the horizon we're going to start seeing some of the landscape. So what I'm going to do there is just start to add some of my lemon yellow, and you'll see I'm not cleaning my brush. We just keep the brush going. We want to bring some of those colors anyway into the foreground, and then what we're going to do is we're going to have a nice kind of field effect here. So this looks like it's going to be quite a big landscape in terms of what you can see. So we'll just do some of the field coming in like this, and you'll see I'm just working straight out of the tube. And then from the left hand side we'll also have some of the landscape coming in, something like that. Then I'll take a little bit of orange, and we'll just pull in some orange, something like that, and you'll see we're getting some nice colors. And what we're doing is we're just building up the layers of colors now, so we're not too worried about what it looks like, but we do want it to start taking some kind of a shape as far as the landscape goes. So I'm still using the same brush, haven't cleaned it yet. Right, so we have this landscape coming across, quite psychedelic in a way. And what I'm going to do now is also just introduce a little bit of yellow ochre, and the yellow ochre is also, it's kind of a warmer yellow, but also great for helping to push back. So we just bringing in some of that. And it's also more of maybe a shadow color, or sometimes great to use if you're putting in a path or something, to use that to make up the path. So here I am just layering that on top of the orange, and you can see the effect that it's having here on the left hand side. And then on the right hand side, I'm going to go back here to some more lemon yellow, and we're going to mix that in with that yellow ochre. And slowly you can see that the effect that we're getting. And then maybe right there at the back, we're just going to introduce a bit of white, just to help push back the top field. So we're just creating just a point of interest here with the white at the back, and we're not doing it all the way across. And then we'll just kind of bring that across, something like that. So there we have a landscape, and immediately you can see that with that contrast with the white, we have this nice point of interest building, but we don't want it to be too strong a line, so we just break it up, and we can see now that that is really far and then coming forward. And then what we do is we're going to introduce a little bit of the ultramarine, because we have something happening there, some trees or something, and then that translates through. And then here we bring it in, but also more as like a bit of a shadow. So we're creating these nice wild strokes. There you go. And then we go back to the lemon yellow bit, and that'll just mix in there with the blue, and that'll create a bit of a green. And right, so there you see you've got this little picture slowly building as we build the colors, and it's starting to develop a bit of a personality here now, exactly what's coming together. So we're just going with the flow here. There's no real specific reference here that we're working from. We're just putting together this landscape, right? And it looks like we have a bit of a focal point here. And then what I'm going to do, just to kind of bring it together there, is we're just going to add in a bit more of that yellow ochre, and that'll just form like a bit of a focal point for everything. And who knows, that might still turn into a bit of a river that runs through the landscape. So there we have this landscape coming together here, and we just add a little bit more lemon yellow here at the top. And then that all comes here to the foreground, and then right here in the foreground I'm going to add a bit of crimson, and that'll just be some foreground stuff. Right. And then I'm also going to bring in some of this ultramarine again. And that'll just keep it nice and dark here in the front. Right, so that's coming along really nicely. And then of course a bit of our lemon yellow just to add more interesting colour. Right, so there we have the lemon yellow coming in, and right, so there we have our interesting landscape developing. So I'm just going to clean my brush a bit, and then maybe this is lending itself to a bit of some kind of a river coming through the middle. So we're just going to, so we're really high up here on this pass, and you'll see here I'm putting in my river, and I'm really just keeping it nice and loose. And what I'm going to do now is, while I have this ultramarine, is I'm just going to build up some, let's just call it some bushes and things that'll be growing next to the river. And we're just going to build that up quickly. So you'll see I'm just adding, and you know, we're just layering and building, so don't worry if on the first attempt it's not exactly what you want, because that will come as the layers of color are built up. So not quite the right brush. Let's go with this one. This one works a bit better. So we want to create this idea of undergrowth. So we want these like blotches of color. So that's what we've done here. And then of course we've got to create a bit of the dark. So back with the ultramarine. So we've used the ultramarine to build up the river, and then we're also going to use that ultramarine to build up this these bushes and things that run parallel to our river. And what I'm also going to do now is add some of this yellow ochre. And you'll see that by building up those layers of color, how we start to create this interesting landscape of just bits of color, which then turn into these more interesting layers of color, and we'll start to represent something, because our brains will want to turn whatever we're looking at here into something tangible. And that means that our brains will automatically start putting in, we'll take the color and turn it into undergrowth and bushes and things. So we don't need to worry about drawing the all the different bushes, because our brains will take care of that. So there we have this winding river, and there we have some undergrowth on the on the right hand side. Now we'll do the same thing on the other side. And what we'll do this time is we're just going to have this coming down from this, whatever it is we have on the left hand side, and we'll follow a similar process of building up the layers. So you'll see I'm just lightly building up those layers, and you'll see I'm not following any particular pattern. We're just putting down the color, and then as we get further away we just start flattening the brush stroke so that it's much flatter. And then here in the front we just do a few more dabs to create the impression of a dabbed of bushes. So we do that, and then we can add a bit of the yellow ochre as well, and that also then creates another range of colors. Which then makes it more interesting. So there we have our bushes, and we're kind of looking at this from the top down. And then on the right hand side, because the light's coming from the left, we're kind of going to introduce this yellow ochre, like a sunshine color, more along the river frontage, and have it peter out towards the back. So there we have our river coming down, and then we're also just going to touch a bit here with the lemon yellow on the front of our river, and you'll see that I'm going over the line. I'm not trying to keep it anywhere strict. Right, so there we have our river, and we've got these open bank areas, and our river comes down, and now what we're going to do is just a little bit more of the dark, so of our French ultramarine, and that's just going to create the shadow. And of course the shadow then is, you can see how that's starting to create more places of interest. And we're just randomly applying that. Right, so there we have this river coming down, coming through here. And what we also want to do is just tab a little bit here, and then here we're going to go for a much flatter kind of scenario. And because the shadow side is this side, just a bit more on the shadow. Right, so there we have our landscape coming together. And you'll see now with this kind of ultramarine yellow ochre look here, we're just breaking some of those lines, and then you'll see that as we start doing that, we start flattening on the horizon and doing longer strokes, and you'll see then how the landscape goes from quite busy here in the front to much flatter, and it's almost as if it starts damming. And already without doing much on the river, our river is starting to come together. So I'm just doing those flatter bits there, and already we have places of interest building, and that's with a combination of the light and of course the dark. So there you can see the shapes of interest, and the interest is really focused here around the river. So our river is where the action is, and we're standing here above on a ledge looking out over what's going on. So we just need to maybe create the impression that we are actually able to stand here at this vantage point. Right, so we need to build that up a little bit. So you'll see how we're gonna. We'll make some more, some bigger brush strokes, more definable. And you'll see I'm not following any particular pattern, and we're just creating the impression that we are on this platform high above what's happening far down below us in this kind of valley. Right, so we have that, and then over here I'm just going to right, so there you can see. Let's add a bit of the yellow. And we want to keep this alive, so we go with the tabs. And then we go with the flatter strokes towards the top. So lots of dabs. Right, so that coming up, and then lots of dabs here again. And we're actually keeping the lemon yellow more down to the river's edge, and we didn't bring it up here too much into the top. We've kind of kept the lemon yellow at the bottom, and now what I'm going to do is add just to the top here. I'm going to add a little bit of orange, and we're just going to that's just going to help to differentiate this foreground from what's happening below. And then just to knock it back, because that orange is really bright, we take some of our French or our ultramarine, and you'll see now that the ultramarine with the orange makes this nice brownish kind of color. And that just takes that brightness out of it. And we do that. And you'll see that this dark is actually what then accentuates what's going on in the valley. So a bit much there, but don't worry, we're just layering. And then here we can create more. And there it looks like we have a bit of a dam. And then here we're going to take this, and we're just going to, in some places, kind of run it up the hill or away, and that'll just make it look like the undergrowth is heading up the side of the hill. Alright, so something like that. And then here on the left hand side, we're just going to create these little, because it's going away from us and it's going to be smaller, we're just creating these little points of interest where, you know, is this a feeder? You know, what is that that's coming down to the water's edge? So, and you'll see that we quite loose with that color as well. Right, so now you can see that on the left hand side we have these feeder elements coming in to the river, and you know, you've always got these trees around the rivers, and you know, maybe it's feeder, maybe it's just nice grassland, trees, wetland, and then as it gets further away, it's less discernible. So there we have the incoming, and now what I'm going to do is we just need to, you'll see here that we have this bright line that runs next to our river, which is great, except that it probably wouldn't be quite so bright, and we just want to push that back, make that look like something else. So instead of the water, we're just going to we use the orange, and now we push that orange back with the ultramarine, and that's maybe just to create more of a shadow and get rid of that bright section. So that's looking good. And then of course what you also have in your river would be little touches of white water. So we're just going to add, you know, and they would be quite random, so we're just touching it with a brush here and there. Alright, so there we have this water flowing down the river here, and in fact we even have the opportunity here maybe to create a waterfall. Seems to lend itself here to some kind of a, and then the water just keeps on coming. So there we have something happening there. And literally just touching the tip. Right, so we don't want it too white, but yeah, so there we have this interesting thing happening, coming down on our river. And here we have some more interesting stuff happening with the bushes. And now you'll see we want to create more of that kind of a look, so that's what we're doing. And here and what we also want to do is maybe with a bit of orange, make that look like a bit of a rock there. Maybe a big rock over there. Maybe quite a lot of rocky stuff happening there. And then over here at the top, some more rock stuff. So we go more with the orange here, and then we knock it back with the ultramarine. And then that creates the idea that perhaps we are standing in a more rocky place than the rest of the landscape. And you'll see now that as and then just to give that a little bit of sun, I'm going to take some of that yellow ochre and so I'm making these a bit more discernible here, and that's because we're standing on this this high ground, and maybe there's some rocks here, and that's what you're looking at. So now you're starting to get the idea that this outcrop where we are here is a lot higher, and then what we'll do is we'll have that stretch off right. So far that's what we're looking at. We've got our undergrowth here, we've got some nice steep ravines and things here on the left hand side that go up to the high ground. And then over here we have then this high ground area. And you'll see that just as we build the color, so we start building our picture. Now you'll see that at the background, it's still looking very blue in comparison to what we have here in the foreground. So we do want to change that, and we do want to make it more kind of acceptable, if that's the right term to use. So we already have this this background color that we can leverage off. So I'm just adding some of the yellow ochre on the sun side of this mighty hill that we have here. So we're just going to do a bit of that. Okay, so already now you can see the difference that that's making to the picture, to the painting, is that that blue that was overwhelming the background is now not so blue. And so we've used that yellow ochre on top of that blue then, and we're just leveraging off the shadows that are created there. And now what we can do, and we're just going to add a little bit of red, not quite right. So we do want to make it a little bit lighter. So what we can do is go with a bit of the white. And you'll see that white's also a good color to push back, because so sometimes we use it to highlight in the foreground, but sometimes it's a good color to help push back the landscape. So here we're going to use it to push back these hills in the background here. And then I'll show you what we're going to do now, just to kind of round that off. And so now we've got that sort of calming down of that background area, but we don't want to make the colors still too. And now what we'll do is use the ultramarine, and it's now going to be a different to that bright red that we had earlier. And we're just going to start using that in our landscape here And you'll see how that's starting to push back, but it's not as hard as it was before. So there we've got the something happening there and something happening in there. So we're just going with our brush into those areas, creating some shadow. And you'll see that with what we've done there now is we're also going to create like some texture in the landscape there. So this is also going to speak to something. It's not just going to be a flat side of the hill. It's also going to have something going on, and what I'm doing is I'm just using some cadmium orange hue, and I'm just using that to build up some interest here. And you'll see that I'm just dabbing my brush, something happening up there, and that's just helping to kind of have this fit in a bit with the landscape below it. And so with that in place, we're then going to add a little bit of this yellow ochre. So you can see now that it looks like we have something happening in that space. We're not entirely sure what. And then I'm just going to bring in the dark again with some of the ultramarine. And I'm just dabbing to create the impression that it's not this kind of smooth kind of place. And now what I'm going to do is taking this brush and a bit of the yellow, and we're just going to dab some trees here. So now you get the idea that there's some fauna and flora happening on the far side there, and a little bit of dark. And you'll see that as we build up the colors so that landscape gets more interesting, and we're just building up the impression that there's something there. We're not actually painting trees. We're just doing some dabs of color, and the color is doing the work for us. Right, so there we have the idea that there is some fauna and flora happening there. Maybe it comes down a bit. Right, so there we have the perception, the idea. That there's something there. And we'll add a bit of lemon yellow. And we just want to do, little bits here and there. And we just dab. And then a little bit of orange. So don't be scared of the color, just put it in. You know that there's no flat colors out there. Everything is a mix of several colors, and so by doing the same thing here, we're creating that impression of lots of colors, and they will mix and do whatever they will do. So there we have that. And then just a little bit more of this yellow ochre. And in this painting, I'm just kind of mixing on the canvas. So I'm not mixing any colors off and then adding. I'm actually just applying the color and then letting it mix on the actual canvas. So there we've created this really nice area of color, which looks like something's going on. And yeah, so we have that coming on, and then over here we opted for a kind of a cleaner space, so maybe more of a grassy, vergy kind of area. And so we're just going to bring in some shadows going up the hill, so it's not as grassed up as the other spaces. And then here we're going to see then about, we want to create the impression of grassland, which means that it will have a mix of lights and darks as the grass follows the contours of the land. So to do that, we just introduce very little bits of the French ultramarine, or ultramarine should I say, it's not the French one, and we just so here we're just doing more of a grassy look, and then being bush, it's not going to be completely green, it's probably going to be more of a yellow ochreish kind of color. And we just right, so there we are building up the grassland. Yeah, so that just creates another interesting element into the landscape. Right, so that's looking pretty good. And now what we need to do is finish the foreground off here, because that's not done yet. And the foreground, we're going to look at like we're on this rocky outcrop. So let's get that done. So here we are on some rocks. Right, and we could have that kind of go around that way. And then I'm going to take some of this orange, and we're just gonna push back some of the, and shape some of the rocks. Right, so there we have the rocks, and we're just going to get some more of this yellow ochre, and we're going to be doing some nice shapes like that, mixing into that color that we just created, creating the impression that we have this rocky base here. And then I'm going to just get rid of some of the other color here. So we're going to get rid of this. We just paint that out. And we're going to add some yellow. And now you'll see that by having that take on the look of the bushes, that it will then create that distance and help create the fact that we are standing above the ground, so a bit more French ultramarine in there. And then some lemon yellow. Right, and that then helps to push that down the hill, and it makes the rocks at the top standing out a bit more. So there we have it. We're kind of looking down this ravine into this valley, and you can see how we've just been building up the color then to show this river that's coming down, and this ravine of textured bush that's up here on the right hand side, and then how this bush then just ebbs away on the left hand side. So So I think you're getting the idea of how that comes together. And here maybe we have some bigger bush. It's coming up the side, and then we're going to add just some of that orange, and that orange will just also help give it that tree look that we need. As it gets closer, so we're going with much bigger, bolder strokes. So there you can already start to see how we create that impression of the closer trees. And then once we've kind of got the base in, then we can start dabbing, and then you'll see how the colors mix in, and then how that dabbing then just helps to create the impression of the bush. So we have this rocky outcrop at the top, which is super smooth. And then we have the dabbing bush. Right, so you can see how we're building up that contrast between the foreground and the bush that's here. Right, and then what we'll do is we'll just do a couple of things over here. Right, so that I think builds that up quite nicely, and then what we're going to look at now is just doing a bit of sky. So for the sky we probably want to go with a bigger brush because we have a bigger area to cover. So I'm going to go with this brush, and we can get rid of some of the colors here. So I've got the cerulean blue, and what we're going to do then is the sky is just going to be this random wild sky. We don't need to go with anything in particular there. And I'm just taking it straight out the tube, and that is quite a dry, sticky kind of affair. So it does tug and pull when you're working with acrylic on paper, but it's also that wildness that creates these interesting spaces, and then we kind of work our way back down to the horizontal horizon line here. And then what we do is we change from the cerulean blue to the titanium white, and then we start to see how we can make these interesting sky patterns. Now the other thing is that I'm not working with a very precise brush, so it does mean that I get these really nice effects with the color. So you can see how we can create these great contrast areas. With the blue in the background and the white cloud. So what I do want to do is I do want to make sure that I don't have any white lines on the horizon. I do want to make sure that we cover this in a nice way, so that it is slightly blue, because the white line is going to be very distracting in the long term. So you'll see now that I have to just hold this down as well while I'm working. And we've got a wildish sky, we don't have anything. You'll see we have these white spots here, kind of blue, dark blue, light blue. A very wild sky, and I do want to just address some of those areas, but I'm not too concerned. I'm keeping it kind of loose, and yeah, we're keeping everything really quite free. You can see how the white line can be very distracting here on the, you know, where the land ends and the sky starts, and why we really do need to make sure that it's not white, that we do bring in some color there. Right, and now what I'm going to do is just add a bit more blue. But our sky is pretty wild, you know, anything kind of goes at the moment there. So we just, and then we'll come back with a bit of white to just knock that down a bit. So there you can see how we creating our sky, some clouds, some not some clouds. What is that? It's just this wild African sky with some cloud in it, maybe not some cloud in it, like, you know, whatever's happening on the day. And maybe we will just do some wilder strokes there. So that's kind of like our sky. We're not gonna worry too much there. Anything can go. And we have these tufts of cloud. And it's building to something that may become a storm or may not. So we're not going to worry too much there about the cloud. And then, yeah, we're pretty much nearly done. So if we have a look at that, and then maybe what you want to do just in finishing then is and then I'm just going to add a little bit of yellow ochre. And the other thing that we do need to do is add a bit of light. It's very yellow ochre-ish, so I'm just going to add a dab of white. Quite risky when you're taking paint from the tube and you do it this way, because you do run the risk of the wrong color. But you'll get used to it over time. And we just want to add some light. So I'm mixing some white there with the yellow ochre. And we're really just talking about a dab of color. And then when we apply, then the colors will mix on the brush. So there you can see a very subtle yellow ochre. Right, so that's that, and then one last touch, and then I think we pretty much done. And that's just a bit of lemon yellow. Right, so there we have our scene with the river. This is how it came through. It looks like the river is coming down here towards us. We have this thick undergrowth here. We've got some rocks here on the right. And then we have this bit of a landscape here on the left-hand side. And what I do want to do here on the left is it's looking far too curated, so I do want to kind of wild that up a bit, and by wild it up I mean break those neat patterns that we have here of the trees and turn it into something more interesting. I just found that you know, your eye looks for patterns and it immediately fell on the pattern of the trees, and then that's where the eye keeps going. So what we've done now is we've broken up that pattern, so now your eye isn't attracted to those little bits of landmass as much, although they're still there. So we just broke that up a bit to get your eye to come back more to the riverside and less to what was happening here. On the left hand side. So right, I think that's going to be it for now. I don't think I'm going to do any more on that. Maybe let that sit and then decide if any more has to be done. So if we have a closer look, then you'll see there we have our picture, our painting, with the river coming down the middle. We've got the mountains coming in from the background with something interesting happening at the base and a wild sky. So I hope you enjoyed that. Thank you for watching.